Rhymefire had grown bold in the courtyard. By now the dragon could nearly look a tall man in the eye, its horned head proudly lifted, dark scales glinting in the slanting rays of late afternoon sun. Thick clouds drifted across the sky, trailing a haze that shifted between pale gold and steely gray, and a biting wind rattled the castle's ramparts. Despite the cold, the dragon lingered with clear enjoyment, drinking in the northern air. From time to time it beat its powerful wings in short bursts, stirring up dust and loose straw, straining upward as if eager to take flight. The watchers along the walls followed its every movement with a mixture of pride and foreboding. Not far away, Arya stood with feet planted in the churned mud, training sword in hand. She had grown comfortable around Rhymefire, even come to regard it as a friend and ally, if such a term could apply to so mighty and unpredictable a beast. The dragon recognized her, too. Whenever she approached, it would dip its head, exhale a soft swirl of steam, and let out a sound that was half purr, half growl. She suspected Rhymefire enjoyed her audacity, the same way Nymeria, her lost direwolf, once had. "Easy," Arya murmured, stepping closer. The gust from Rhymefire's wings buffeted her hair loose from its braid, sending dark strands flying across her face. She reached out and stroked the dragon's flank. The scales were warm and faintly damp, tingling beneath her fingertips with a latent hum of energy. They reminded her that this was no stable creature like a hound or horse. It was a living conflagration and a shard of winter, both at once. Yet it lowered its head, letting her run a hand along its neck where lighter scales hinted at deeper coloration. Nearby, Catelyn Stark watched her daughter with concern, standing at the edge of the courtyard beside Ser Roderick Castle and a few guards. In many ways, she had resigned herself to Arya's boldness, her tomboyish ways and her fierce desire to forge her own path. But this was different. This was a dragon, an ancient, dangerous creature capable of devastating entire battalions. Yet Arya carried herself with a calm confidence that was uncanny, as though she and Rhymefire understood each other on a level beyond simple words. Catelyn turned slightly, her cloak flaring. "How large will it grow, Ser Roderick?" she asked quietly. The master-at-arms, mustache flecked with new gray, pursed his lips. "The old texts say dragons can grow as large as a castle tower given enough time. But it depends on many things, how they're fed, how free they are to roam. Some claim that captivity can stunt them. Others claim that magic or lineage plays a role. This one, being unusual, may grow at a different rate." "I can't say for certain, my lady," Catelyn nodded, sighing. "We've seen so many changes these past moons, and I fear it's only the beginning." As if echoing her words, Rhymefire let out a short roar, half lifting its forelegs from the ground. The watching guards instinctively gripped their spears or swords, but the dragon only hopped forward a stride, then settled again, scanning the sky. Catelyn's gaze flickered upward. Rhymefire kept trying to fly, could manage short gliding leaps, but not truly soar yet. That day would come, though, and soon, and with it, the power to leave Winterfell behind and roam wherever it wished. She wondered how one contained a force of nature that was never meant to be caged. Bran emerged from a nearby archway, flanked by two men carrying a large wooden chest. Though Bran still walked without difficulty in this telling of events, he had developed a quiet gravity to him, an otherworldly introspection. He directed the men to set the chest down near the stable entrance, then waved them off. The box contained new harness pieces, a set of thick leather straps that Robb had commissioned. If Rhymefire could be fitted with them, no small feat, it might be guided in flight, at least to some extent. It was a notion borrowed from the Targaryen tradition of dragon riding, though no one in living memory truly knew how that was done. "Are we trying this now?" Arya asked as she saw Bran. Her eyes shone with excitement. Bran approached, giving Rhymefire a wide berth until the dragon bent its head down to regard him. "Father said to wait until we have a full retinue of guards," he said. "Rhymefire's strong. If it thrashes, you could be tossed aside. Or burned. Or frozen." Arya stuck out her chin. "It trusts me." Rhymefire gave a sound like a feline hiss. Bran eyed the dragon's ridged spine and the shimmering membranes of its wings. Trust might not be the right word, Bran said. We're not Targaryens with centuries of practice, Arya. We don't know how to do this. Arya only shrugged. Well, we have to learn somehow. Before Bran could respond, a horn sounded from the main gate, echoing across the courtyard. The watchers turned to see a small party of riders entering the castle. Their banners fluttered in the wind. One showed the crowned stag, black on a field of gold, and the other displayed the golden lion of House Lannister. A hush fell. It seemed more Southerners had come calling. At the head of the party rode two figures. The first was a man of middle years, thick around the waist with a short, well-kept beard. He wore fine clothing trimmed with gold, and his horse was a powerful destrier, its tack shining. Behind him rode another man with a more severe aspect, wearing the black and gold tabard of House Baratheon. They were accompanied by a handful of mounted men-at-arms, likewise clad in the Baratheon or Lannister sigils. Catelyn recognized the first man as Lord Giles Rosby, a minor lord with ties to King's Landing, known for his persistent cough and his reluctance to brave the northern cold. The second man might be a knight in the Baratheon retinue, but she did not know him by sight. As the riders dismounted, she and Ser Roderick stepped forward in greeting. Ned Stark emerged a moment later, having been alerted. He approached with a measured stride, cloak swirling around him, solemn courtesy on his face. Lord Rosby, he said, inclining his head, you've come a long way from King's Landing. Giles Rosby coughed into a kerchief, eyes watering from the chill. Lord Stark, he wheezed, the king sends his regards. I carry messages from the council, as well as from certain interested parties. His gaze flickered to the courtyard, where Rhymefire loomed behind Arya's slim figure. He visibly swallowed. 7 save us, that is truly a dragon. Ned gave no outward sign of pride or fear. You'll find Winterfell's hospitality as warm as we can manage, he said, though the wind can bite. Come, we'll speak inside. Rhymefire snorted as if in defiance of the invitation. Arya took a step back and aimed a narrow-eyed look at the newcomers. All these southern lords would want their piece of the dragon, she suspected, or they'd want it caged or worse, killed. Ned gestured for Bran and Arya to stand aside, so he could lead Lord Rosby and his party to the Great Hall. The visitors cast uneasy glances at the dragon as they passed. Rhymefire hissed softly, stretching its neck. Steam rose in thin curls from its nostrils, mingling with the faint swirl of frost that clung to the corners of the courtyard. Jaime Lannister soon appeared from a side corridor. He had been in Winterfell for weeks now, part observer, part reluctant mediator. When he spied Lord Rosby's retinue, he quirked an eyebrow, then fell in behind them, curious to hear what new instructions or entreaties the king had sent. Jaime himself had penned numerous letters to Robert, detailing the threat beyond the wall and the strange powers of the Frostflame dragon. He half expected Robert to arrive in person, full of righteous bluster. Yet Robert remained in the Red Keep, apparently preferring to rule by decree rather than freeze in the north. In the Great Hall, braziers had been lit, though the ever-present chill lingered. Ned took his seat at the head of the long table with Catelyn to his right. Lord Rosby coughed again, removing his gloves to warm his hands. I trust you received the king's earlier messages? He began. Ned inclined his head. We did. We responded, explaining the threat we face. Yes, your letters. Very troubling indeed. Lord Rosby cleared his throat wetly. The king, that is, King Robert, he takes seriously your claims regarding these undead creatures beyond the wall. However, the crown remains concerned about the presence of a dragon in the north. There are fears that House Stark may intend to use it to carve out a kingdom of its own, as Aegon the Conqueror once did. The realm remembers well how dragons shaped the fate of Westeros. Ned looked at the table for a moment. My lord, you saw the beast yourself just now. It is far from the size of Balerion or Merax's. It is barely a fraction grown, and House Stark has used it only to defend our lands and support the Night's Watch. Lord Rosby dithered. Even so, the symbolism is potent. When the realm hears that a great house has a dragon, we cannot ignore the possibility of a new conquest. The king wonders if, perhaps, it would be best for the dragon to be relocated, for the good of peace. The crown might arrange for it to be taken to Dragonstone, under heavy guard. Catelyn pressed her lips together. Ned's expression hardened. "And then destroyed?" he asked quietly. Lord Rosby coughed again, stalling. "I am not privy to every detail of the council's deliberations," he said. "But I can say that the king remains unconvinced of the necessity of a living dragon to fight these whites. He asks for proof of the threat. If it is as dire as you claim, perhaps the crown can spare men or resources if you send the dragon south. A gesture of goodwill, you see." Ned's voice cooled further. "I have already risked men beyond the wall, my lord, where we fought abominations that do not fall to normal steel. My own children faced them. That is proof enough for me. Yet the king demands more? Let him come north himself if he doubts. Or let him send watchers of his own. Jaime Lannister has seen it with his own eyes." Jaime, leaning against a nearby pillar, gave a small nod. "It's true," he said. "I faced those whites. They were real enough. The dragon's fire and frost proved valuable." Lord Rosby looked faintly discomfited. "Sir Jaime's letters have indeed arrived," he murmured. "Yet the council," Ned cut in, "may not realize that what lurks beyond the wall cares nothing for titles or claims. If the dead stir, they will come for us all. The North has discovered a weapon that might hold them at bay, and the crown wants to take it away or kill it out of fear. I will not yield to that course. The dragon remains in the North." Lord Rosby's face reddened from more than just the cold. "You must consider the realm's stability. King Robert does not want another Targaryen crisis. If you refuse his request, matters may escalate." Ned gave a long, steady look. "If the realm's stability hangs on the notion that the North must remain vulnerable, I question that stability. House Stark has guarded these lands for thousands of years. We know our duty. The dragon is part of that now." Silence reigned for a moment, broken only by the crackle of the braziers. Lord Rosby coughed once more, dabbing at his lips. "You leave me little recourse, Lord Stark. The king instructed me to present certain letters. They urge that the dragon be relinquished. If you refuse, there are some on the council, Lord Tywin Lannister among them, who press for more forceful measures." Jaime's expression flickered at the mention of Tywin, but he remained silent, arms crossed over his golden breastplate. Ned said quietly, "Lord Tywin does not frighten me. My concern is for the realm. Let him muster an army if he wishes to march north. We will not simply hand over this beast so it can be slaughtered. Not when we have evidence it may be the realm's best defense." Catelyn placed a hand on Ned's arm, as if sensing the tension rising dangerously. "We will not be cowed," she said gently but firmly. "But let us not be hasty in our words." Lord Rosby, still flustered, managed a shaky nod. "I understand. The crown, well, I was sent to deliver the message. I shall remain for some days, gather more information, and perhaps attempt to persuade you. The realm does not wish war, my lord. Nor do you, I trust." Ned's anger simmered, but he hid it behind a polite mask. "Very well. You may stay as our guest. We shall speak again." With that, the gathering dissolved. Lord Rosby and his escort were guided away to chambers prepared for them, stammering about the bitter cold. Ned lingered in his seat, flanked by Catelyn, Jaime, and a few others. The tension was palpable. Jaime exhaled slowly. If Tywin wants that dragon or wants it dead, he'll press the king. And Robert's nature hasn't changed much since the rebellion. His hatred of Targaryen power is still strong. A live dragon must seem anathema. "Rhymefire isn't Targaryen," Ned snapped, more emotion creeping into his voice than he intended. "But that's lost on them." Catelyn frowned, smoothing a hand over her skirts. "Robert might still be convinced if we can show him the true danger. But how? Send whites to King's Landing in a crate, so they can see?" Jaime snorted. "That might be dramatic, But proving the undead are real to men who haven't seen them is difficult. I only believed it myself when they tried to tear me apart. Ned-eyed Jaime, you swore in your letters that you stand witness to the threat. Are you willing to go further? To speak openly against your father if he tries to use the crown to destroy the only weapon we might have? Jaime's gaze hardened, an unusual seriousness in his green eyes. Lord Stark, I'm no stranger to doing what's necessary for the realm, no matter the cost. But crossing my father is complicated. Catelyn looked away, as though remembering her own father's complicated legacy. Ser Jaime, if your father truly stirs the king to war against us, the realm will be the worse for it. Perhaps you can find a way to counsel caution. He nodded, though uncertain. I'll do what I can. For now, I remain here observing. That's my charge from Robert. Ned rose from the table, the finality in his posture signaling the meeting was over. We'll remain watchful. Let them see the truth in time. We can't force them to open their eyes. Over the next few days, the Baratheon and Lannister envoys roamed Winterfell, quietly gathering details about the dragon's growth, the reaction of the small folk, and the lines of defense. Ned offered them measured hospitality. He allowed them to witness some of Rhymefire's training, carefully orchestrated so as not to appear too warlike, nor too uncontrolled. In one demonstration, the guards brought out a straw dummy in old armor and set it on a post. Rhymefire was led by Arya, who whistled softly to guide the dragon's attention. At her signal, Rhymefire reared back, chest expanding. A torrent of fire burst forth, engulfing the dummy in a roaring blaze that left only blackened metal behind. Then, the dragon followed with a blast of chilling frost, which crackled over the scorched remains and shattered the metal plating like glass. The southern observers were both awed and frightened. One of Lord Rosby's men whispered about the danger of such a creature in open battle. What knight's steel could stand against both fire and ice at once? But Rhymefire was not all terror. The dragon had its moments of almost cat-like affection around those it trusted. More than once, Jaime or the Watchers saw Rhymefire curling around Arya or Bran, letting them rub its flanks. The beast's eyes would half close, rumbling in contentment, though a whiplash of that spiked tail would keep onlookers at a distance. There was intelligence there, something watchful and deep that belied the dragon's outward power. Meanwhile, winter's grip on the north grew stronger. The sun set earlier each evening, and swirling snows dusted the courtyard most days. Still, the old weirwood in the gods wood stood with its crimson leaves, shedding them slowly. Bran continued to sense that the dragon's presence was affecting the local climate in subtle ways. Moments of sudden thaw that defied the season, balanced by abrupt chills. The lines between winter and its opposite seemed thinner, as though the shifting heart of Rhymefire's magic tugged at nature itself. One night, when the wind howled across the rooftops, Ned Stark found himself pacing the dim corridors, burdened by sleeplessness. He decided to descend to the crypts, where the statues of old Stark lords watched silently. Carrying a lantern, he made his way past the carved likenesses, the stone direwolves at their feet. Here rested Rickard Stark, Ned's father. Here lay Brandon and Lyanna. In this version of events, they had no direct cause to connect with Targaryen tragedies, but their memory still weighed on Ned's heart. He felt drawn deeper, beyond the known tombs, toward the place where they had once found the hidden subchamber. The warmth of the hot springs made the air damp, casting flickering reflections on the walls. He paused at the collapsed entryway that once concealed Rhymefire's egg. Though the egg was gone, some residual heat radiated from the ground, a gentle pulse. He knelt, pressing his palm to the old stones. In the hush, he remembered the swirling images he had seen when he first touched the egg. Visions of cold, of blazing fire, of swirling storms over Winterfell. Now that vision felt closer to fruition with every passing day. The realm was at a crossroads, and House Stark stood in the center, clutching a power that could unite or divide them all. Ned's calm sense of duty weighed heavily upon him. For centuries, the Starks had carried the burden of the North, but never had they faced a power like this, nor a threat as grave as the White Walkers, if the legends were to be believed. He rose, sighing softly. He could only hope that the realm's other lords would see reason and stand united. If not, everything might collapse in flame and shadow, no matter how powerful Rhymefire became. The next morning, a surprise arrived at Winterfell's gates. A traveling merchant caravan from Bravos. Their leader was a flamboyant man with a forked beard and a swirl of colorful silks peeking out from beneath his heavy fur cloak. They claimed to have braved the Bight and White Harbor, traveling far north to see if the rumors of a living dragon were true. Ned hesitated to let them in, but tradition and custom allowed merchants to come and go. They were searched carefully, and the guards watched them for suspicious behavior. The Bravosi marveled at the dragon's existence, offering gifts of exotic spices and fabrics in exchange for an audience with the beast. Ned saw no harm in letting them glimpse Rhymefire from a distance, though he refused them any close approach. The Bravosi bowed and exclaimed in wonder, spinning quick yarns of how the free cities spoke in hushed tones of new dragons rising in Essos. One merchant even claimed to have seen a red comet in the sky, an omen that always accompanied the birth of dragons. Arya, who liked the freewheeling energy of the Bravosi, listened to their chatter with interest. "You're telling tales," she accused one older woman in a lilting accent. "No new dragons have been reported in Essos. Everyone would know." The woman smiled slyly. "Perhaps, little wolf, perhaps. But Bravos has many eyes and ears. We hear tales of Targaryen heirs stirring across the narrow sea, of eggs lost in the seas near Dragonstone. Perhaps there are more dragons. Smaller, bigger, who can say?" "Eri," snorted. "Rumors." She turned her attention back to Rhymefire, who was clamped behind heavy iron bars as a precaution whenever strangers drew near. She couldn't help feeling a stab of pride that Rhymefire was real, not a rumor or a myth. This was the North's own living legend. Meanwhile, the presence of the Bravosi caravan reignited speculation among the southern envoys, who feared foreign powers might seek alliances with the Starks in return for control or influence over the dragon. Lord Rosby coughed his concerns to Ned, warning that the crown would see such dealings as sedition. Ned calmly assured him that no such negotiations were taking place. But rumor spread far faster than truth. As winter's gloom deepened, word came by Raven that the Ironborn had begun raiding the coasts again. Pike's lords tested their might, perhaps sensing the crown's distraction. Seaside villages were burned in the north, while the crown itself had to dispatch fleets to the Reach and the Westerlands. In short, the realm was fracturing under the tension. Some wondered if House Stark would unleash the dragon upon the Iron Fleet. Others claimed the crown might divert its hostility from House Stark to the Ironborn, seeing them as the greater immediate threat. For Ned, the question of fighting on multiple fronts was grave. He needed to keep Rhymefire for the coming war against the Cold Shadows, not waste the dragon's power on a petty squabble at sea. But the Ironborn threat escalated quickly. A large band of Reavers attacked a settlement just south of Torrens Square, burning farmland and carrying off prisoners. The Knights of House Stark responded as swiftly as they could, but the raiders slipped back to their longships, leaving destruction in their wake. The surviving villagers arrived at Winterfell, half frozen, telling harrowing tales of the Iron Men who struck before dawn, slaughtering livestock and taking the youngest as thralls. Ned's jaw tightened with fury at the news. Robb, newly hardened by experiences beyond the wall, approached his father. "We can't let them continue this unchecked," he said. "It emboldens them. If we bring Rhymefire to the coast, we could set their ships ablaze from the sky." Ned sighed, eyes dark. "We cannot be everywhere at once, and Rhymefire is not yet strong enough to mount a full-scale assault on an entire fleet. Moreover, if we bring the dragon to the sea, it leaves the north unguarded. The undead threat has not faded, Robb." Robb frowned. "Then what do we do? The small folk suffer while we wait for the White Walkers. If we must fight on two fronts, we need help from the crown. But they refuse to help unless we hand over the dragon." Jaime, who was present, spoke up. "Perhaps we can coordinate. My father would see the Ironborn as a nuisance, but King Robert might be persuaded to send ships if you promise not to oppose him in other matters. Offer them something in return for immediate relief from these raids." Ned shook his head slowly. And what would that something be? The dragon is off the table. Jaime opened his palms. Then maybe an agreement to let the Crown station southern troops in the north, close to Winterfell, so they can keep an eye on Rhymefire. I'm not saying I endorse it, but it might buy you time and men to deal with the Ironborn. Robb bristled. We might as well invite them to occupy Winterfell. Catelyn placed a calming hand on his shoulder. Let's think carefully. We can't let pride blind us to alliances that might help the small folk. Ned's gaze was somber. I'll send a raven to King Robert, detailing the Ironborn raids. I'll remind him that we, too, are part of the realm, and that the dragon has been used only in defense. If he refuses to help, we'll do what we must on our own. But we will not bend on the matter of Rhymefire's relocation. At times like these, Ned missed the simpler days when all he had to worry about was the occasional wildling raid or a petty northern dispute. The addition of a dragon, and the reemergence of what might be an ancient horror beyond the wall, felt like a storm of fated proportions. That night, after the day's heated discussions, Arya found herself wandering the Godswood. The hush of the snow-laden trees soothed her. The weirwood's face watched impassively, and a thin layer of ice coated the black pool at its center. Snow clung to the branches overhead, muffling the world. She breathed in the cold, fresh air and thought of the path her life had taken. Once a restless girl who hated sewing and lessons on ladle-like comportment, now a young woman who trained with a sword and tended to a half-ice dragon. She heard a stirring behind her and turned to see Rhymefire padding silently across the snow, each clawed foot leaving a crisp impression. The dragon had grown adept at slipping its guards from time to time, always seeking new corners of Winterfell. Arya smiled slightly. Sneaking about again? She teased. Rhymefire approached the Godswood's heart tree, sniffing at the red leaves that quivered in a faint breeze. A swirl of frost formed around the trunk, then melted in a shimmer of warmth. Arya swore she sensed the tree reacting, as if the old gods themselves inhaled that flux of power. She stepped beside the dragon, placing a hand on its flank, feeling the rhythmic surge of breath. The dragon's long neck craned toward her, and she gazed into those golden eyes. Sometimes Arya felt as though Rhymefire wanted to speak, or that it spoke in a language of temperature and scent beyond human hearing. A flash of memory. The whites in the snow, the swirl of flame, the bone-chilling cold that had saved her brother. She whispered, "Thank you for helping us that day." The dragon blinked. She knew it didn't understand her words, not as a man might, but she believed it grasped her intent. A rustle in the branches caused Arya to glance up. A raven perched overhead, its black eyes gleaming. Rhymefire let out a low rumble, but the bird did not fly away. It watched them for a moment, then let out a single caw and took wing, disappearing into the snowy sky. Arya shivered, aware of how the quiet of the Godswood could feel like the breath of ancient forces. She turned back to Rhymefire. "Come on," she said. "Let's go back before the guards panic." The dragon huffed, releasing a swirl of misty breath that sparkled in the moonlight. Then it followed her out of the Godswood, footsteps crunching over the snow. Over the following weeks, tensions mounted as ravens flew back and forth between Winterfell and King's Landing. Robert, entangled in court politics and threatened by Tywin's hints of aggression, vacillated between ignoring the Ironborn raids and promising minimal assistance if House Stark complied with the Crown's demands about the dragon. Ned's frustration grew. Every new message seemed more contradictory than the last. In the end, it became clear that no significant royal aid would arrive to stop the Ironborn. The North was left to fend for itself. Ned wasted no more time. He dispatched bannermen to shore up coastal defenses and arranged for watchers along the shoreline. He knew Rhymefire's presence might deter some raids, but using the dragon near the sea was risky. He did authorize Robb to lead a swift strike with the dragon if the Reavers came too close to an inland village. It was a partial measure, but perhaps enough to keep the Ironborn wary. Meanwhile, Lord Rosby and his retinue remained in Winterfell, complaining of the cold while they continued their attempts to persuade or intimidate. Jaime Lannister acted as an intermediary, though even he seemed at a loss when dealing with the crown's contradictory edicts. Then, another bolt of news struck like lightning. A large wildling host had assembled near the wall, bigger than any in recent memory. Rumor said it was led by a self-styled king, uniting clans that had long warred among themselves. More alarming were the reports that some among them had encountered the others. Fear thrummed through Castle Black. The Night's Watch was sorely under strength. If a horde of wildlings marched south, or if they were driven by the others, it could lead to chaos. Ned convened an urgent council in the Great Hall. Robb, Bran, Arya, Catelyn, Ser Roderick, Maester Luwin, and Jaime Lannister attended, along with some of the other northern lords who had come at Ned's summons. Lord Manderly of White Harbor, Lord Serwyn, Lady Hornwood, and others. Lord Rosby, though not truly invited, managed to lurk on the periphery. Ned stood at the head of the table, hands braced on the carved wood. The Night's Watch warns that a host of wildlings, maybe 10,000 or more, pushes south. They're rallying behind someone called Mance Rayder. The Watch cannot repel them alone, not without heavy losses. And if the rumors of others among them hold true, it may be a threat beyond normal wildling raids. Lord Manderly's brows shot up. 10,000? That's a small army. Are they seeking refuge from something? Or do they mean to invade? That is not entirely clear, Ned admitted. But the men of the Watch say the wildlings are fleeing a deeper terror. Some speak of whites, others, an endless night. If these wildlings are running from the same threat we glimpsed beyond the wall, it could mean that what we faced was only the beginning. They may be desperate enough to break through in force. Arya spoke up, disregarding protocol. Then we should bring Rimefire. We can't just wait for them to climb the wall, can we? A murmur ran around the table, some voices uncertain. Lord Serwyn said, "If we join the Night's Watch with our knights and the dragon, it might deter any breach. But with so many men, it might become a war." Ned looked at Jaime. If the crown had any sense, it would reinforce the Watch at once. Jaime shrugged helplessly. You know how precarious things are in King's Landing. The king's advisors question the validity of these threats. They worry more about rebellious lords or Targaryen pretenders in Essos. And with Tywin pressing for the dragon's removal, I doubt you'll see help from the south in time. Ned nodded grimly. Then we stand alone, as the north often does. Very well. I'll march with a portion of our forces to the wall, along with Rimefire. We'll treat with Mance Rayder, if possible, to see if peace is an option. If not, we'll defend the realm. Meanwhile, I'll need some of you, he glanced at Lord Manderly, to keep watch on White Harbor and the coasts, in case the Ironborn grow bold again. Lord Manderly stroked his ample chin. I'll do as you command, Lord Stark. White Harbor stands with Winterfell. But if we are so beset by threats, do we truly want to bring the dragon near the wall, so far from the rest of the north? Ned closed his eyes briefly, imagining the swirling snow and the inhuman eyes of the whites. If the others are truly among this host, Rimefire may be the key to stopping them. We cannot risk leaving the dragon behind, only to face an undead army without our strongest weapon. Yet we must be cautious. 10,000 wildlings with archers and spears. A young dragon is not invincible. Catelyn's face was pale. Will you leave any of our children behind? We cannot risk them all. Ned considered. Rickon will remain here as well as Sansa. Arya, I suspect it would be pointless to forbid you from going. His tone was wry but tinged with worry. You have a bond with Rimefire that few others do. I've seen the way it responds to you, and I won't deny that you've proven yourself in battle, beyond what any of us wanted. Arya's heart surged with relief and excitement, though she tried to hide it. Part of her was fearful, but she knew she couldn't sit idle. Bran spoke up. I should go too, Father. I've dreamed of what lies beyond the wall. I feel I'm meant to see it with my own eyes. Ned glanced at him. I know you have strong instincts, Bran, but you're still young. If we face open battle, Jaime cut in smoothly. He's got as much right to go as Arya, I'd say. The boy has keen senses, and from what I hear, he's not half bad with a bow. Bran set his jaw, grateful for the unexpected support. I can fight, and if Rhymefire is with us, perhaps there's more to glean from that connection. Ned exhaled slowly. Very well. If you're resolved, you may come. But stay close to Robb or myself. Do not go running into the wilds alone. So it was decided. A northern host would gather in Winterfell's courtyard, forming a column to ride for the wall. Rhymefire would come, flanked by extra guard wagons loaded with feed, salted meat, and the new harness in case they attempted any sort of aerial advantage. The watchers on the walls of Winterfell would remain on high alert, and the keep would not be left undefended. Some portion of the Stark bannermen, along with Lady Sansa and the household staff, would maintain vigilance. But the main force, led by Ned Stark, Robb, Arya, and Bran, would head north. When the day of departure arrived, the courtyard bustled with activity despite the bitter dawn chill. Soldiers clad in warm cloaks checked their gear, crossbowmen tallied bolts, and stable hands secured provisions onto sturdy northern horses. The banners of the direwolf snapped in the wind. Rhymefire stood near the gates, restlessly shifting from foot to foot, the iron harness partially strapped around its torso and neck. The contraption had proved difficult to fit. The dragon kept twitching its wings, testing the clasps. But so far, it hadn't tried to burn or freeze the contraption off. A promising sign. Arya circled Rhymefire, tightening a strap here, adjusting a buckle there. Bran looked on, helping when needed, his breath steaming in the cold air. The dragon's eyes followed their movements with a mixture of curiosity and mild annoyance. More than once, it let out a rumbling growl when a strap pinched. Ned, astride a tall gray courser, gazed at them from a short distance, a pensive look on his face. Jaime Lannister, wearing a heavy fur-lined cloak over his gilded armor, approached. "And so the expedition begins," Jaime said lightly, though his tone was subdued. "I never dreamed I'd be riding to the wall in the company of a Stark-led dragon." "Nor did I," Ned replied. "Yet here we are." Jaime glanced at Rhymefire. "I'll ride with you if you'll have me. I'm not sure how my father would view such an excursion, but Robert gave me leeway to observe, and I'd rather see what's truly beyond that wall." Ned studied him. The history between them was tangled, but these were desperate times. "Your sword might be welcome," he allowed. They turned to watch as Robb mounted his own horse, his direwolf, Grey Wind, padding at his side. Grey Wind eyed the dragon warily. Rhymefire let out a short hiss, but did not seem truly hostile toward the wolf. Another odd sign, as though acknowledging they both belonged to House Stark. When all was ready, Ned raised a hand, signaling the assembled men to move out. Hooves clattered on the stone, wheels creaked, and the fortress gates swung wide. Rhymefire, at the head of the column, set off at a steady lope, wings partially unfurled, as though tasting the wind. The sight was awe-inspiring and unsettling. Rarely had a dragon marched as part of a mortal army. Some of the soldiers tried not to stare, others made signs of the Seven or the old gods. The watchers left behind on the battlements whispered among themselves, uncertain if they would ever see that fearsome beast or the departing lords again. Their journey north was cold and treacherous. The wind bit at exposed skin, and snowdrifts sometimes blocked the roads. Still, the men pressed on, heartened by the presence of the dragon. Rhymefire provided occasional bursts of warmth, especially at night. When they made camp, the dragon would curl around the perimeter, exhaling gentle heat that kept the worst of the chill at bay. More than once, some hapless soldier who strayed too close nearly got singed or frosted. But for the most part, Rhymefire seemed oddly calm. Arya stayed near it, ensuring it didn't lash out. The men grew to respect her for that, murmuring that the girl had the spirit of a direwolf herself. Bran spent his nights dreaming. He had strange visions of swirling snow, ghostly figures, and a lone weirwood that bled into the ground. He sometimes woke to find the dragon staring at him from the edge of the camp, golden eyes bright in the moonlight. He had the uncanny sense that Rhymefire was aware of his dreams, or at least aware of the resonance between him and the old gods. Yet no words were exchanged, only a silent understanding. As they drew closer to the wall, the air grew ever colder, the forests sparser. The land seemed hushed, as if bracing for calamity. Scouts rode ahead, returning with reports of small wildling bands found dead in the snow, some from exposure, some from violence. One patrol discovered a half-frozen survivor, who babbled about the others creeping closer. He died of fear or cold a day later. At last, the towering wall appeared on the horizon, its icy face glimmering beneath a leaden sky. Castle Black's dark silhouette crouched at its base like a shadow. The watchers on the ramparts sounded horns when they saw the dragon approach, uncertain if it was friend or foe. But as the host drew nearer, men in black cloaks hurried out to greet them, relief mingling with awe at the sight of Rhymefire. The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Benjen Stark in this telling, still alive and older now, embraced Ned with a mixture of warmth and urgency. "You came," Benjen said, voice tense. "I wasn't sure if the realm's politics would keep you away." Ned clasped his brother's arm. "We have no choice. We heard of Mance Rayder and the others." Benjen nodded gravely. "The wildlings are massing at the Fist of the First Men, if our scouts are right. Mance wants to break south. He says all the free folk will die if they stay beyond the wall. Whites have been spotted in droves, and some whisper the White Walkers move among them." At that, men glanced at Rhymefire, remembering the blasts of fire and cold that could destroy undead. The dragon's tail lashed the ground, leaving a trail of steaming footprints in the snow. Benjen eyed the beast warily. "So it's true you have a dragon. I never thought to see such a thing in our lifetime." Ned sighed. "Nor did I, but we'll use every means we have to defend the realm." "Is there hope to treat with Mance Rayder before it comes to open war?" Benjen scratched his beard. "Mance was once a brother of the Watch. He might parley, but his people want to get past the wall at any cost. With 10,000 at his back, plus giants, mammoths, it's not a small threat." Bran's eyes lit with curiosity at the mention of giants. Arya's lips parted slightly, but she kept silent. Ned surveyed the grim men of the Watch, their faces drawn with exhaustion. "We'll help you fortify. Then I'll lead a small embassy to speak with Mance. If the others are truly among them, maybe we can unite against a common enemy. If not," Benjen finished the thought, "then it's war." They spent the next few days preparing. The Stark soldiers and the Night's Watch combined their efforts, repairing defenses, checking stocks of obsidian daggers and torches. Stories said that dragonglass could harm the others, but who knew if those stories were accurate? Fire worked, that was certain, and Rhymefire possessed fire and frost in abundance. Jaime Lannister remained watchful, absorbing the harsh reality of the North's predicament. He had never been so far from the comforts of the South. The frozen ramparts and the towering wall made him shiver more than he liked to admit. Yet he found himself oddly moved by the stark determination of these men in black. They truly believed in their cause, and the evidence he had seen beyond the wall lent weight to their fears. This was no petty skirmish for power. This was survival. When the plan was set, Ned led an embassy through the gates of the wall. Himself, Benjen, Robb, a small guard of Stark bannermen, and a handful of the Night's Watch. Arya insisted on coming, bringing Rhymefire behind them, but Ned forbade her from the actual parley. Instead, she would wait in reserve a short distance away, in case all turned violent. She hated being left out, but recognized the need for caution. A face-to-face meeting with a free folk king might require fewer overt threats. Even so, she stayed mounted, the dragon at her side, in case the worst happened. They journeyed across the windswept terrain beyond the wall, haunted by silence broken only by the rasp of wind and the creak of packed snow. The trees, bent and gnarled, loomed like skeletal sentinels. The land felt barren, as though life itself had retreated. Robb's breath plumed in frosty puffs as he urged his horse forward. Occasionally, they spotted footprints or old fires, evidence that wildlings had passed. At length, they approached a rocky rise overlooking a frozen river. There, arrayed in rough lines, stood hundreds of wildlings. They were dressed in furs and hides, carrying spears, axes, crude swords. Some had braided hair or painted faces. Among them stood taller figures, giants. Robb and the others swallowed hard at the sight of those massive forms, each easily 10 feet tall or more, with thick arms and broad features. Mammoths snorted plumes of steam, shifting restlessly under the command of their giant riders. At the forefront of the host was Mance Rayder, a lean man with salt and pepper hair, wearing a mix of black wool and wildling hides. He greeted them with a disarming smile. "Ned Stark," he called, though his tone carried wariness. "Long have I heard of the Warden of the North, but I see you've come as a supplicant." Ned halted his horse a few yards away, raising a hand in a gesture of peace. "I come to speak, Mance Rayder, no more, no less. If you desired war, you could have descended upon the wall already." Mance's dark eyes shifted to Robb, then to Ben-Jen, whom he recognized from years past. "I gave the watch time to see sense," he said. "We don't come to conquer, but to flee. The others are real and they're coming for us all. We want to cross the wall and live." He gestured behind him at the throng of wildlings. Mothers with children, old men clinging to staves, warriors and raiders, all sharing the same haunted expression. "If you bar the way, we'll tear it down if we must. We'll all die otherwise." Ben-Jen bowed his head solemnly. "Mance, I believe you, but we cannot simply open the gates to thousands who once raided our villages. The realm would see it as an invasion." Mance snorted. "The realm can see it however it wants. We either cross or we all face the others. This isn't a game of lords and kings. It's life or death." Ned weighed the situation. A horde of wildlings crossing the wall could spark panic in the north. Yet turning them away might condemn them to become whites, who in turn would swell the army of the dead. "What if we allowed some crossing under strict conditions?" he ventured. "We check them for weapons, settle them in the gift, have them vow peace. Our men keep watch. If your people do not raid, we can try to integrate them." Mance studied Ned with a measured look. "You'd trust me to keep them in line?" "I'd trust you as far as reason allows," Ned said. "And the presence of a certain ally might ensure compliance." "We have a dragon, Mance." A ripple of reaction passed through the wildlings. Some hissed, others muttered in disbelief. Mance's face tightened. "A dragon? We've heard rumors. But I'll not bend the knee to a beast or to a southern king." Ned's expression remained neutral. "I'm not asking you to bend the knee, but understand. If we must, we'll defend the wall with that dragon's flames. The others fear fire, so should you if you break your word. But we'd rather avoid bloodshed. If the real enemy is these others, we might do better to face them together." Silence reigned for a moment, as Mance surveyed the lines of freezing wildlings. Many looked desperate, hollow-eyed. They would not survive a pitched battle against a fortress, especially not if a dragon were truly there. But neither could they remain in the far north, waiting to be hunted by whites. He exhaled, a plume of white steam. "We have no love for you kneelers," he said, voice low. "But perhaps we have no choice. I'll consider your offer. Let us see this dragon, to confirm the truth of your words." Ned hesitated, glancing at Robb and Ben-Jen. The original plan was to keep Rimefire hidden until they had a sense of Mance's intentions. But if Mance demanded proof, revealing the dragon might be necessary. "Very well," Ned said. He turned and gestured to one of his men to blow a short horn signal. A distant echo responded. Over the ridge behind them came Arya, mounted on a rangy mare, with Rimefire bounding alongside. The sight caused an uproar among the wildlings. Many stepped back, shouting curses or prayers, brandishing weapons in alarm. Giants bellowed, mammoths stamped the ground. Rimefire roared in response, a swirl of steam and sparks rising from its mouth. For a moment, it seemed the Parley might collapse into chaos. Mance Rayder stood his ground, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "Gods!" he muttered. The swirling rumors of a half-ice, half-fire dragon had not prepared him for the reality of a scaled beast as large as a carriage, black horns curving from its head, and golden eyes blazing with primal energy. He watched as Arya brought the dragon to a halt a good 100 paces away from the main group, giving a wide berth to the wildling ranks. Arya stared across at the horde, pulses of adrenaline coursing through her. She could almost taste their fear. Rimefire hissed, shifting its weight. "Steady," she murmured, stroking the harness. She didn't want to provoke an attack, not yet. Mance stepped forward a few paces, arms half-raised. "You see us?" he called to Ned, tired, half-starved. "Some of us have weapons, but we're no match for a dragon. We only want to live." Ned's expression softened slightly. "Then let us try to find a way. Surrender your arms at Castle Black. Pledge to keep the peace. We'll allow you passage south. Those who wish to fight the others may stand with us. Others we might settle in unclaimed land under watch. But if you break faith," Robb finished the sentence, "the dragon's fire will answer, and so will our swords." Mance's eyes flicked between them, a tension in his posture. Yet behind him, the wildling's relief was visible. Better to have a chance at life than face certain death in the White Waste. Slowly, Mance nodded. "I'll speak to my people. Many won't like it, but we have no choice." Benjen stepped forward. "We'll escort you to the wall in small groups. The realm might not like it, but we'll handle that problem later. The dead are the greater threat." A sense of cautious optimism took hold. Mance and Ned exchanged final words, arranging the details of how the wildlings would be brought through the gates in an orderly manner, how they would surrender their weapons to the watch, how they would be distributed in the gift under supervision. The tension in the air did not vanish. Many free folk eyed the uniformed knights with distrust. Many watchers kept hands near sword hilts. But a spark of possibility rose. If the wildlings could be integrated, perhaps the realm would have more living warriors to face the others, rather than more undead foes. Arya and Rimefire remained as living proof of the consequences of betrayal. Several wildling warriors parted to give the dragon a wide path, cursing or muttering in languages Arya did not recognize. She saw children among them with faces pinched by cold, clutching at mothers or older siblings. Her heart lurched, realizing these were no different from the small folk of the north, just scrabbling for survival. If it took the threat of a dragon to keep the peace, so be it. Thus, over the next days, a slow, tense migration began. In increments, groups of wildlings, from warriors to families, trudged south toward the wall under the watchful eyes of the Night's Watch and Stark soldiers. At the gate, each was searched and made to relinquish weapons. Some spat curses, some sobbed in relief. The children stared wide-eyed at the looming ice, and even more wide-eyed at the dragon that stood guard just beyond. Giants and mammoths proved trickier. They resisted, grunting and stamping. But with Mance's guidance, and the sight of Rimefire breathing flickers of flame, the giants grudgingly complied, crossing into the realm of the Kneelers. Not all wildlings agreed. Clusters of defectors broke off, refusing to disarm. Skirmishes flared in the snowy wastes. One group tried to assault the watchmen, only to be scattered by a single pass from Rimefire, its frost breath freezing the ground so that the aggressors slipped and fell. Then a short blast of flame forced them into retreat. Fear of the beast loomed over everything. While this managed to keep a fragile peace, Ned, Benjen, and Mance conferred daily, mindful that the threat of the others was still out there. Scouts reported strange sightings in the far distance. Blue-eyed shapes that vanished at dawn, lines of footprints in the snow leading nowhere. A creeping dread settled on the men who stood watch at the top of the wall. Amid these uncertain days, the bond between Arya and Rimefire strengthened. She spent hours riding alongside the columns of wildlings, ensuring no one grew bold enough to challenge them. At camp, she'd feed Rimefire from shared supplies or from hunts. More than once, Mance approached her with curiosity. "Are you its rider?" he asked, eyeing the harness and the protective cloak she wore. Arya, still quite young and feeling somewhat self-conscious, shrugged. "I don't know if I'm a rider. We're just friends. Family, maybe." Mance's gaze flicked to the dragon's mesmerizing eyes. "Dragons are no man's family, girl. But if it obeys you, or even half obeys, that's worth more than crowns." Arya didn't answer. She wasn't sure if Rimefire obeyed her or simply tolerated her presence. At times, the dragon tested her, flaring its wings or letting out a sharp hiss that made her heart race. But she refused to back down, meeting its gaze until it quieted. She felt a kinship in that primal challenge, much like training with a sparring partner who respected only strength and confidence. As the wildling exodus continued, Ned wrote daily missives to Winterfell, updating them on the situation and instructing them to prepare supplies for an influx of new arrivals. He dreaded the political repercussions of letting so many wildlings into the north, but the alternative seemed worse. If the others truly marched behind them, far better that the wildlings be on their side. Jaime, watching all this, found himself unexpectedly moved by the Starks' willingness to show mercy, even as they brandished a dragon. He had never credited Ned Stark with much imagination, but here he saw a man juggling practicality and compassion, forging alliances that the South would scoff at. Jaime penned letters to King Robert, relaying the developments. He warned that thousands of free folk now moved south of the Wall under Stark's auspices, armed or unarmed, and that a dragon patrolled their route. He tried to emphasize that if the White Walkers came, these wildlings would be allies, not enemies. Word returned eventually, though it took many days for ravens to travel. The Crown's response was ambiguous. There was talk of sending an envoy, talk of condemning Ned Stark's actions as unlawful, talk of commanding the Starks to cease. But no real action was taken. Some said the king was embroiled in conflict with the Ironborn, who had launched a daring raid on the western coast. Others claimed Tywin Lannister was pressuring the king to declare House Stark in open rebellion, but Robert hesitated, not wanting a northern war while the Ironborn threatened his own seat of power. The realm teetered, uncertain and fractious. Amid the slow crossing, new complications arose. Not all wildling groups recognized Mance Rayder's authority. A vicious raider named Tormund Giantsbane roamed the edges, half-allied, half-suspicious. Another warband, led by a woman called Val, refused to disarm unless they had proof that crossing the wall would grant them safe passage. Tensions threatened to erupt into violence more than once. One evening, a small band of wildlings led by a scarred man in furs challenged the watchers at the gate, refusing to give up their axes. The watchers drew steel, and blood might have been shed had Rimefire not swooped in from above the gate, letting out a warning roar that rattled icicles loose from the ramparts. The wildlings dropped their axes in terror, cursing, and the watchers quickly bound their hands. Order, enforced by a dragon's primal threat. Robb, who had witnessed this, turned to Bran. This is a tenuous balance. The moment Rimefire isn't watching them, some might attempt a breakout. Bran nodded, troubled. I know, but I can't blame them entirely. They're trapped between the wall and the threat behind them. At least here, they might survive. In the starlight, Rimefire perched on a section of collapsed ice near the gate, wings half-furled, tail flicking. Arya was on guard nearby, bow slung across her back. She had rarely felt so tired, between patrolling all day and coaxing the dragon to keep calm around thousands of strangers. She found little rest. But she recognized the necessity. If they could get through this, the North would have a stronger line of defense when the others came in force. That was the new worry. What if the White Walkers appeared with an army of whites? So far, only scattered undead had been sighted, lurking on the fringes. But the Watchers felt certain that a larger host gathered, biding its time. They posted double sentries on the northern side of the wall, prepared for an attack that might come at any hour. Finally, after long days and nights, the majority of the wildlings had crossed into the Gift. The Snowgate, near Castle Black, had been overwhelmed, so they utilized other passages. Tunnels were opened at Eastwatch and the Shadow Tower, all heavily guarded. The hope was that dispersing the free folk along the eastern and western edges might reduce tensions. Ned and Benjen saw to it personally, though the logistical nightmare weighed on them. Mance Rayder, Tormund Giantsbane, and a few other leaders came through last, escorted by a guard of Night's Watch Rangers. They laid down their arms with open reluctance. Ned greeted them, though he remained cautious. "You know the terms," he said. You and your people will be observed. If you break the peace, we cannot guarantee your safety." Tormund was a huge, bearded man with a booming laugh. "I will behave, unless you lot cause trouble." Then he cast his gaze at Rimefire, who crouched behind Ned. The dragon was close enough that Tormund could feel its heat emanating through the frigid air. "That beast is half made of ice. Sure it's not a frost giant in disguise." Arya smirked. "It's half made of fire, too. Don't test it." Tormund let out a bark of laughter. Spoken like a true wolf girl. Mance remained more reserved. "We're in your hands, Ned Stark. Let's see if your generosity matches your threats." Now that the wildlings had crossed, the Watchers turned their eyes once more to the north, scanning for any sign of the others or white armies. Patrols ventured beyond the wall. Some found nothing. Others reported glimpses of figures at dusk or dawn, silhouettes in swirling snow that vanished before they could be pursued. The sense of a looming storm persisted. Arya, with Rimefire, joined one such patrol, accompanied by Robb, Bran, Benjen, and a small group of Watchers. They rode carefully through the broken terrain, scanning for tracks. Half a day's ride from the wall, they came upon a scene of horror. A cluster of wildling corpses arranged in a twisted spiral, their eyes frozen open, limbs contorted. The swirl of the arrangement echoed the stylized patterns sometimes attributed to the others, or to the children of the forest. No footprints led away, but the temperature felt impossibly cold, even for the far north. Bran shivered, dismounting to inspect the bodies. Robb knelt beside him, a hand on his sword hilt. "Gods," Robb breathed. "It's like they were posed." Benjen's face was grim. "This is the work of the others or whites under their command. They send messages. Or warnings." Arya's stomach churned at the sight. Rimefire snarled, stepping around the outskirts, steam rolling off its flanks as the cold deepened. When the wind shifted, they smelled decay. No animals had scavenged the bodies, which was telling. Even the wolves or crows avoided what the others touched. Suddenly, one of the corpses moved or seemed to. Arya gasped, twitched, and arm jerked. Instantly, Benjen shouted a warning. Robb drew steel. The Watchers readied torches. But the corpse went still again, and no white rose from the snow. Perhaps it was just an illusion of the shifting wind, or perhaps something lingered, teasing them. Rimefire roared, blasting a surge of flame across the nearest cluster of bodies. The corpses caught fire with unsettling swiftness, releasing a foul stench. The Watchers coughed, stepping back. Then the dragon exhaled a wave of frost that extinguished the flames, leaving a steaming pile of half-burned flesh and ice shards. It was a grim, final end to whatever malevolence resided there. "That's enough," Benjen said, voice rough. "We should go. There's no sign of a large army here, but we can't stay. The others might be near." They turned back, Rimefire bringing up the rear, vigilant. Bran rode in silence, mind whirling. The pattern of the bodies haunted him, reminiscent of old symbols he'd seen in dreamlike visions. Something deeper was at play, some ancient motif repeating itself across centuries. Perhaps the others had their own language, one of spirals and shapes. The thought made his skin crawl. When they returned to Castle Black, they found word from Mance Rayder that more stray wildling groups had arrived in the gift. The men struggled to feed them, many were near starvation. Tensions flared between the new arrivals and local villagers. But overall, the crossing was winding down. The immediate crisis, thousands of wildlings demanding passage, was resolved, at least for now. The next crisis, however, loomed beyond the ice. Ned, weary and heartsick from the corpses they had seen, called a final council with Benjen, Mance, Tormund, and the Stark children in attendance. Also present was Jaime Lannister, who had accompanied the patrol to see the ghastly arrangement of corpses. No one doubted the threat any longer. The question was what to do next. "There's no sign of a massive white army," Ned said. "But we can't assume it isn't forming further north." Benjen agreed. "If they're gathering, we might not see them until they choose to strike. The land is vast, and they move in strange ways." Mance, arms crossed, frowned. "We've done what we can to get our people south of the wall. That's all that matters to us. But if you want to hunt these others, or wait for them here, that's your business." Jaime spoke up, surprising some by the conviction in his tone. "If the others truly come, the entire realm is in danger, and ot just the north. We should try to make the south understand." Tormund spat on the ground. "The south, pa. They'll never believe it till an army of dead men knocks at their gates." Robb, pacing near the small hearth, paused. "Then we must be ready here at the wall to meet them. Father, maybe we should bring more northern bannermen, fortify the castles along the wall. If the crown refuses to help, the north will stand on its own." Ned rubbed his temples. The swirl of duty threatened to overwhelm him. "Yes, we'll recall more bannermen and prepare. But we have few resources to feed the wildlings. We'll need supplies from White Harbor, from Barrowton, from the castles along the King's Road." Mance tilted his chin. "We free folk can hunt. We'll survive. Just don't pen us in and starve us." Ned gave him a level look. "All we ask is peace in return. No raiding, no theft." Mance nodded curtly, conceding the point. They left it at that. The Watchers would remain vigilant. Rimefire would patrol the northern side of the wall in tandem with the black-cloaked rangers. Meanwhile, ravens would fly to each northern lord, summoning them to muster, or at least to prepare for war. Ned would remain at the wall for a time, directing these efforts, while his children either stayed or returned to Winterfell if the situation allowed. For now, the presence of the dragon near Castle Black had a stabilizing effect, ensuring neither wildlings nor Watchers turned on each other. And so a tense vigil began. Day after day, Rimefire soared in slow arcs near the top of the wall, occasionally landing to glare out over the endless white expanse. Arya took to riding up in the cage lift with a few Watchers, from which she would wave or call out to the dragon. More than once, Rimefire circled overhead, letting out a roar that echoed across the ice. The Watchers found themselves strangely comforted by the sight. Fire and ice, merged in one beast, standing guard against the creeping cold. Winter deepened. Snowstorms battered the ramparts. Some Watchers whispered that they saw strange lights in the sky at night, flickering like ghostly fires. Others claimed they heard wailing voices carried on the wind. The tensions in the gift remained manageable, though isolated incidents of violence flared between wildlings and local northerners. Each time, the threat of the dragon forced them to keep the peace. Still no massed army of the dead appeared. Some began to hope that the threat had passed, that the others had retreated. But Bran's dreams grew darker, showing him glimpses of an oncoming doom, a swirling maelstrom of snow. He confided in Arya one night as they stood near the top of the wall, the wind numbing their fingers. "We haven't seen them yet," he whispered. "But they're out there. I feel it, gathering. They might wait until the worst of winter, when the nights are longest and cold strangulates the land. Then they'll come." Arya clenched her jaw. "Let them come. Rimefire will burn them." But she, too, felt a coil of dread in her stomach, suspecting the battle would be harder than any of them could imagine. Time crawled on. Ned faced constant logistical challenges, while Benjen juggled nights' watch duties. Mance tried to keep his fractious people in line. Jaime hovered, sending missives to King's Landing, receiving contradictory replies. Robb busied himself training recruits, forging them into a cohesive fighting force that might stand a chance against an undead foe. In the midst of it all, Rimefire presided like a silent sentinel, alternately warming the Watchers and reminding the newly settled wildlings that winter's wrath was not the only danger in the north. Back in Winterfell, according to sporadic ravens, Sansa and Rickon were safe. The realm was unsettled, and the Ironborn continued their raids along southern coasts, drawing most of the crown's attention. Word came that Lord Tywin massed forces in the west, ostensibly to deal with the Ironborn threat to Lannisport, but perhaps also as a veiled threat to the north. Tensions near the Vale soared, with rumors of Lord Royce and Lady Lisa embroiled in petty quarrels. It seemed all of Westeros sat on a tinderbox, and no one truly believed in the dark rumor of the other's return, except the north, which lived in the shadows of that threat daily. Eventually, Ned realized he could not remain forever at Castle Black, not without letting Winterfell's governance unravel. He and Benjen agreed. Once the wildlings were more or less settled, Ned and some of his party would return south to manage the North's muster and fortifications from the seat of House Stark. Rhymefire, however, might stay near the wall for a time, rotating in and out of Winterfell as needed, ensuring the Watchers had their best weapon close at hand. The question was, who would handle the dragon during Ned's absence? Bran volunteered without hesitation. "I'll stay," he said. "I sense something in the Weirwoods, something that calls me to remain. Perhaps I can help if the others come soon." Arya's immediate instinct was to volunteer as well. She didn't want to leave the dragon or the wall, especially not if a great battle was brewing. But Ned pointed out that the North itself might need her presence if war erupted in the southern marches. Reluctantly, she accepted that logic. If the Crown or the Ironborn attacked while Ned was away, Winterfell would need every capable fighter. Robb would return with Ned, also needed to coordinate the bannermen. But Bran would stay with Rhymefire and a portion of the Stark soldiers. The day of departure arrived. The courtyard of Castle Black was a churn of slush and mud as Ned's group ready to ride. Arya stood by Rhymefire, feeding it the last of the morning's rationed goat. The dragon's eyes flicked between her and Bran, as if sensing a shift. Benjen nodded to them. "We'll take good care of him," he said, meaning both Bran and the dragon. "Though from what I've seen, the dragon might end up taking care of us." Arya placed a hand on the dragon's scaled cheek. "I'll see you again soon," she whispered. She wasn't sure if dragons understood or cared about such sentiments, but Rhymefire rumbled softly, a warm exhalation washing over her. She felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, though she swallowed them back. Then she turned to Bran, clasping his hand. "Don't do anything reckless," she said, forcing a teasing note. "You're the quiet one, remember?" Bran tried a small smile. "I'll be careful, sister, but if the others come, I'll do what I must." Arya nodded. She felt older and more worn than her years, as though the burdens of war and wonder weighed on her. She imagined how many across the realm lived in comfortable ignorance of the gathering storm. Ned and Robb said their farewells to Benjen, to Mance, to the Watchers who saluted them in black cloaks. Then they led their mounted party out of Castle Black, bound for the King's Road. Jaime lingered a moment, exchanging final words with Benjen. "I'll ride with Lord Stark for a while," Jaime said, "and see how the realm responds to these developments. If King Robert or Tywin Lannister tries to stir trouble, I can testify to the threat we saw." Benjen clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of respect that Jaime might never have expected from a Stark. "You're not the man I thought you were, Kingslayer," Benjen said, half smiling. Jaime huffed. "Perhaps I'm simply older and more tired. Or maybe the stories about the others spooked me more than I'll admit. Good fortune to you, Benjen Stark." With that, Jaime spurred his horse, joining the departing column. Rhymefire roared a farewell from atop a parapet, sending a swirl of flame and frost into the sky. The Watchers shouted in awe, wildlings paused in their labors, and the travelers felt the reverberation in their chests, a thunderous note that lingered in the cold air. Arya glanced back repeatedly as they rode away, watching the distant figure of the dragon perched against the pale sky, until the castle and the wall and everything were swallowed by the rolling slopes of snowy hills. She felt an ache in her chest. Would she next see Rhymefire leading a final stand against the White Walkers? Would the realm unite in time, or would they descend into civil war, ignoring the true enemy at their doorstep? Only the old gods knew, and the old gods remained silent, their weirwood faces carved into expressions of sorrow or quiet resolve. Winter was coming, truer now than ever before. Yet House Stark, in some twist of fate, had found themselves guardians of a creature that embodied both the biting chill of the north and the searing heat of dragonflame. If there was any hope of staving off the darkness, it lay in that improbable union of ice and fire. For now, they could only press on, forging alliances, preparing defenses, straining every sinew to keep the realm from tearing itself apart. The story was not done. Nor would it be until the others came in their full might, or until the dragon soared in open battle, blazing a path through the endless night. But in the hush of the cold wind, there was a faint sense of possibility, like a solitary candle flame flickering in a storm. Such was the balance of hope and dread, perched on the edge of a new age in Westeros, with the dragon eggs hatching beneath Winterfell as the catalyst for a destiny yet unwritten.